from the rain and the stone, where the wind has no name and the traveler's alone. There's warmth in the fire and truth in the tale of the watcher who walks where the bold-hearted fail. He carries no sword, yet the darkness gives way to the lantern he lifts at the end of the day. He stands on the Watchtower, still and unswayed, where the lost find a path through the fog and the fray. Pilgrimsgrey, oh steward of the lands, you carry the light in your weather-worn hands. A tale at the hearth, a guide through the night. You open the gate between the wrong and the right.
So, Robert, welcome to Countdown Radio. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate you having me on your show.
Well,
it's always nice.
It's an honor to have you here. And Robert, since you're new to many of my listeners, I'm sure there's some of my listeners who have listened to some of your stuff, because as I discovered just recently, not too long ago, I came across some of your material, Pilgrimsgrey, Chronicles, and I just loved it. I said, I have to get this gentleman on, and so it's an absolute honor to have you here today. So tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into this, and why you're doing what you're doing, I guess.
Sure. I was born into a military family. So I've lived all over the United States. I've seen a lot of different things. Even when my father was a corpsman in the Navy, my mother was a wave. They met that way in school. And even after my dad got out of the service, because his forte eventually became computers, he wound up working on bases that had cobalt or, archaic old language that many military bases are still using today. So they needed to have people like my father there that could still do the old stuff, because most of the new guys know all the new languages. And so, but even then, after we got out of the service, because he was working on bases and contracts come up, we wound up moving probably every year or two. So I really learned to be a people watcher, and was always just observing. And it just kind of led into me being an observer and a reader, and which led to me very early on, probably about age 9 or 10, after seeing Ralph Baskin's The Hobbit cartoon on TV. I think it was like 1976 or so. Anyway, I became fascinated with Tolkien's work and read that. I read everything I could get my hands on by the time I was 12 or 13. And sometimes I still read them, like different books, like once a year or so, or it's been a while now because I've been so busy. But so that led into me having this desire to write and observe, and to skip way forward into the future and how this translated into this show. About 5 or 6 years ago, I began looking into authoring a book. I wanted to write a fictional account of the world before the flood, the golden age before the flood, towards the tail end, where there would be this civil war that was ending, that was between the Grigori, the Anunnaki, the rebellious angels, ceased fighting each other and began to move back towards Eden, because they had consumed and used up everything, and their world was faltering. Anyway, long story short, it's just a world, before the flood. And it's a fiction thing. But as I began studying to make sure that this book was as accurate as it could possibly be, things that I had never known before about Scripture began popping up every place. It was a real eye-opener for me. So I began getting introduced to various people, because you have to dig very, very hard to find anything out about the world prior to the flood. And so one of the first people I came across was Trey Smith, I think his name is. And I looked at his work, and it was very interesting, but and it told me a lot of things. But I progressed from people like Trey Smith to Michael Heiser, Derek Gilbert, Chuck Misler, numerous people. Those are just the names I can think of off the top of my head. And the more I found out about what really happened, rather than what I learned in, Sunday schools, although most of my life I didn't attend worship services. I started going to a church regularly about 20 years ago. And but most of my life I had not. I still remember the few times that I went to church very early on in my life. When I was younger, my grandparents, who were Catholics, took me to a Christmas service, and I'll never forget the nuns teaching me. I mean, it's like one of my first memories. I don't think I could have been much more than 5 or 6, but I do remember them teaching me about the Christmas story in Luke chapter 2 and all of that. And just from that moment on, I don't remember a time in my life or in my heart or my mind that I did not know that Jesus was God in the flesh and came to save us, and have had a relationship with God ever since then. I talk to him constantly, and either in my mind to myself or verbally out loud. Even if I see a beautiful tree and I'm just walking around with my wife, I will just thank God for the beautiful tree. Sometimes I do it just in my heart and mind. Sometimes I do it verbally. But this led into my show, because as I researched and found out more and more, I felt compelled to not just write the book, but to, when you find out this kind of information, for some people like myself, it's not good enough just to be a sponge and soak it in, right? You get that information, and, it's kind of like knowing, in some cases, not every case, but I'm going to use a negative. It's like knowing a bridge is out, as an analogy ahead. Why would you not tell everybody, hey, I just discovered this bridge that's out up ahead here. You probably don't want to go down this road, right? Why would you not warn people, right? And so that's kind of my heart with a lot of what I'm doing. I'm just sharing information I've learned. And this also is about the same genesis for our band, Pilgrimsgrey, where we did an album called Elevensies, because I'm a Tolkien's fan, because I was born on November 11th. And there just happens to be 11 songs on the album. It's nothing occultish. I realize the number 11 is associated with the occult, but not in my case. And so it was a concept album that had a musical warning to it. All the lyrics are about what happened before the flood, what happened shortly after the flood, and how these same rebellious sons of God are still operating in our world today in various ways. And that's what my show is about, this whole seed war between God and those who love him and his chosen people, and those who are engrafted branches into that spiritually, and then those who are on the other side, whether they're rebellious angels, their offspring, hybrids, or just humans who happen to prefer that side, or could even be confused through misinformation by the other side. The whole prominence of this movement of seeing Lucifer as a Prometheus light-giving figure is more prevalent today than I've ever seen in my life. There's nowhere I can go that I don't see a Masonic lodge or license plates or people with tattoos of Masonic symbolism or the literal compass and square and G. I mean, it's every place. Like, it's like pop culture, and I don't think they care to even be hidden anymore. Does that make sense?
It totally does make sense. I thank you for sharing that, because like you said, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Or you didn't quite say that, but that's kind of what you said. That once you're aware of something, once you realize this is what the real history is, this, and we were told this. I mean, when I started to see all of this, I started to say, wait a minute. So that means that all these people, these entities in Greek mythology, that's real history. That's not it's not mythology. This is actual history. These were beings that existed and may still exist to this day in some shape, form, or another. And so that once you start thinking like that, well, you can lose friends over it, but at the same time, it's absolutely, it changes your perspective. But I think what I love, the first thing that I saw of yours was your writing, the way you write and the way you express yourself. And of course, I'm a great fan of J.R.R. Tolkien and Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and all of these stories. I just love the story of how both he and C.S. Lewis, they both are creating these worlds where they can express stories which have tremendous, the meaning in those stories is very powerful. I mean, there's in a world of relativity, which we live in so much, there's good and evil very clearly delineated. And so I think that the power of story as a way to communicate truth is something that I'm very intrigued in. So I like that part of your journey. I think that's fantastic. Tell me a little bit, I'm just intrigued with you mentioned some people, you mentioned Derek Gilbert there, Michael Heiser, who's with the Lord, of course, now. We've had Derek has been a regular on this show here. And so, we've talked with him. And of course, we've had Doug Hamp on three times, I think, already. So talking about some of his thoughts along those lines as well. So we've crossed some interesting paths there. So, as you look at what you're seeing unfolding, I mean, you express it as the seedball, and I think that is a very apt way to describe what is going on here. Do you want to unpack that a little bit more as to how you see that actually playing out in this? Well, perhaps we could even talk about America. I mean, one of the things that happened to me, this is probably a dozen or more years ago, maybe 13 years ago. There was a gentleman called Bill Sudduth, and he did a tour of the United States, and he was talking about the history of Freemasonry and the history of Islam. And of course, he gets into the whole idea of Francis Bacon and all these people that they were creating this new world and literally in the new world. But he talked about something he called two parallel destinies. He talked about God's destiny and the destiny of the demonic. And in terms of using the United States as a kind of launching pad for bringing about a new Atlantis, which certainly Tom Horn wrote a lot, provided us with a lot of material in that line. Do you delve into that topic at all?
I will delve into anything that I think is related to the Seed War. And that would, it's interesting, you mentioned a couple of names there that I just didn't think about, but who's Doug Hamp? I recently saw him in a Land Between the Lakes conference. My wife and I went to the Red Brick Inn in Kentucky, Land Between the Lakes, and he was one of the speakers, but he wasn't able to be there in person. He spoke, and he was speaking on his Corrupting the Image 2. I think he's got 2 books, right, on that. And I've never read the first one, but I'm already kind of familiar with it, so I was more interested in reading the second. But yes, Tom Horn, another name you mentioned, that was another person I discovered early on. him and the other guy that was on a radio show all the time with Tom Horn. I got introduced to Tom Horn's work by Justin and his brother, the Fall Brothers.
Oh, yes, the Fall Brothers. Yes,
yeah.
yes. That's some incredible work they've done, actually, in terms of films and stuff.
Yeah. And the one that I heard Tom Horn for the first time was the Belly of the Beast documentary. And it's where I discovered that most of our American, forefathers were Masonic, Illuminati, and it's interesting to me that even though maybe they were more interested in their Novus Ordo Seclorum than really Christianity, it still provided an environment where tares and wheat could grow together, right? I mean, the very freedom they built a foundation for the liberty to be able to do their practices, whatever they may be. But I mean, I know what they are, but I don't want to go into all the Bill Schnoebelen stuff.
Yeah, I got you. Yeah, Bill Schnoebelen. Yeah, I like Bill Schnoebelen.
Yeah, I do too. I think he's a character. And that's why I did a show recently about him and some of his stuff. But I really think it's interesting that all of this stuff they may have meant to be able to further their cause also helped Christians to be able to worship the way they wanted. So I know people would say, well, we weren't really a Christian nation and so on. And there's some truth to that, but it's also not necessarily true, because many of the things they wrote in to why they put these things into our Bill of Rights and so on were based off scriptural passages, like, Leviticus and all these Old Testament works to build a foundation of freedom and liberty. Now, their motivation for doing it might not have been the best, but does it matter, since we now have also the liberty as Christians to be able to speak also and worship far more freely than a lot of other places. I know that's slowly being choked out of existence. However, we can still do it, right? And I know I've already had a couple of strikes from YouTube about bringing certain things up, so I try not to do them. I'll do it maybe some other time in the future when I've taken the time to sort of fireproof myself from that by either getting my own .com or a Rumble channel or whatever. So we could keep going even if YouTube shuts us down. I mean, I have a separate hard drive where I have all my videos that I can re-upload if I need to. But I believe, to change gears a bit, I do believe the seed war is sort of the main narrative that goes from the very beginning of the fall of man, possibly even into the heaven rebellion that some people believe took place somewhere in Genesis, chapter 1, verse 1. If you subscribe to the gap theory, and I could go one way or the other on it. I don't think it's necessary, but it's a plausible idea that I don't have a problem with. But I think these beings still operate today. They're just restrained wherever the Holy Spirit is prevalent for real. I don't think it's as easy for them to operate like they did in their golden age before the flood, or even thereafter for some time, until God he did. He got fed up at Babel, right? It was like, okay, you want to chase these gods? Fine. You can divide the nations up between yourselves, you little g gods, and have these human beings worship you. And I'm going to choose this guy right here, whose father's busy making, idols for Nimrod himself. But he's going to be my guy, Abram, right here. And I'm going to make a nation out of him, from whence your final destruction will eventually come. And so clearly, these rebellious little g gods who've ruled over the nations pretty much ever since in one shape or form or another, at least until the crucifixion. I don't think it's any coincidence that at one point Jesus sent 70 of disciples out, right? I mean, that's a key number there. And so he sent them out into the world to do what? To reclaim it from these beings. And I think it makes it far more difficult for them to operate. And it has ever since. Do they still operate? Well, it's pretty obvious they do. I just think that was a huge stick in their spokes at Babel, number one, with the confusion of languages, because it's clear one of their goals is to unite humanity in their own sort of unified language, unified front, unified rebellion against God by presenting themselves as the real light givers, the ancient wisdom beings, the whole Blavatsky thing. And we see it in pop culture every place, right? Like, how many movies have we seen where we have DC heroes, Marvel heroes, or even new ones where these superheroes that just went away for a while until we start screwing up really bad again, and then they come back and help us. Even though I think it's just a massive Hegelian dialect, right? They all operate together to create a crisis and then come as our, knights in shining armor to save us all, right? And of course, it works, right? Because we lap it up. I fell for the Trump train in 2016, thinking he was an outsider, but I don't subscribe to it now after digging deep and looking into it. I know the connections. I won't bring them up and get into politics or anything here. We only have an hour.
It's okay. Feel free. I just touched on it recently over the issue of, well, isn't it interesting that all of a sudden we're going to bury the Epstein story? We're not going to talk about that. Fancy that now. Just passing it on the side.
Yeah. Well, if anybody wants to know what I think about it, because I think, remember a little bit ago you mentioned once you see it, you can't unsee it. And so I can't even watch Netflix any longer without seeing their communications between each other with certain symbols and numbers. I mean, we were watching the new, my mind is drawing a blank.
I don't know. While you're thinking about that, I'll say this. I was so in our, we have like a Shabbat meal and a Bible study on a Friday. And I was reading through Romans, and in Romans chapter 1, when I was reading that and started to look to it in actually have an Aramaic translation, I was looking at that and I realized, you know what? Paul was not just talking about homosexuality. He was talking about the worship of fallen angels right here. That's what he's talking about in Romans. And it takes it to a whole different level when you see that. Oh, well, wait a minute. Yeah, it's not just homosexuality. That's part of the subject, but that's not the whole being here, right?
Right. And that's funny that you say that, because the things that I used to think were the Sunday school level. Look, I have nothing against Sunday schools. Don't get me wrong. I think the basics do need to be taught, but that's milk, folks. What you're being taught in church is milk and wafers. When you, for instance, an example of what you're talking about, the parable of I can't remember the name of the parable, but the son who goes out and spends all of his inheritance. The prodigal son.
The prodigal son. I was one of those. So I
lived
that one. I lived that one.
I think we all are at some point or another. So the prodigal son, he goes out and squanders it all. And I always wondered, what's the deal with the older brother? What's his problem? I mean, it seems like he's comping an attitude with, and I never thought much of it, beyond that. But like Tim Alberino points out, that older brother is most likely the angelic problem with us. Why some of them are like, I don't want to have anything to do with these humans. They're a bunch of jerks. Why is our Father in heaven, our Creator here, giving these guys what they're getting? We've been here and we've been, So I get it, and I think the tares and the wheat are more than just what we were taught in Sunday school. I don't think that the tares and the wheat are simply good Christian people, you're saved people, which I do believe the wheat is that. But the tares, we just always assume we're, bad people or whatever. But now I don't think they're just bad people. I think they may be people who aren't even fully human any longer. And I think when we get to the end of things, it's not just going to be that, because in my childish infant phase of Christianity, I just thought in Revelation, so many people are going to die that when the Lord returns and splits the Mount of Olives in a wide valley, and I purposely say wide valley for the SLSers, it is a wide valley capable of holding all the Israelites who are faithful to be able to hide in as he comes back for cover. Not a small crack that got filled in like some other guy said. But anyway, I look at all of these things and then I think, wait a minute, it might not just be death. What we could be referencing here is that there's so little of humanity left because they're no longer human. They've either bred with these things again, or they have allowed themselves to be changed by transhuman technology, which I think is coming, and which is another warning I give to SLS people, is if you already believe the Antichrist has been here, he's already implemented his beast system and forced people to take a mark, then whether you want to believe it or not, because in one exchange I had on YouTube, somebody said, well, that's a laughable idea. We're just as filled with the Spirit and alert and all these things, but and on guard and watching. But why would you be watching for something that's already happened? If you think all of Revelations happen, including the mark, then your guard is automatically going to be down against something like Neuralink because the mark has already happened. So when technology comes along that from the Antichrist, which, by the way, is not this monstrous person that we all had images of in our heads in Sunday school class. He is a replacement Messiah. People will think this is a messianic figure, like he's Jesus, like he's God returned to humanity. So if this person, this Antichrist figure, this replacement Messiah, brings us technology that restores sight to the blind, can make the lame walk, right? Can restore hearing, gives you the ability to tap into incredible intelligence like a hive mind, like the Holy Spirit, like a replacement. And you can do all these amazing things, including the possibility, because this is something I'm investigating too, of uploading your consciousness into the cloud and downloading it into either another cloned like human or possibly even an android type figure. Because I also think that demonic spirits are completely capable of dwelling, if they have permission, within even statues, which is why they made them back then. They didn't just worship dead, stupid stone statues. There's a reason they made them. And it's because demonic figures did present them things. They did give them crops to grow. They did do things in nature. They weren't stupid people. Look, these people built megalithic structures that we have no idea how they did today, aligned with astronomical things, calculated to the nth degree on certain parallels, lining up with star systems. You really think that they were, barely able, just inventing the wheel, Bronze Age idiots? I don't think anything they've told us about history is true. I think there was a super advanced civilization both before the flood and, of course, after the flood. It's going to look like there might have been cavemen-like dwellings or whatever, because they just got over a catastrophe that wiped out virtually every living thing on the surface of the earth, right? So, I really believe that, I know I'm all over the place here, but I really believe I really believe that these little g gods are completely active today. They either avatar people, which they don't need to do. Hebrews, I think it is, talks about how they can take on, and we know in the Old Testament they take on human form, and you cannot differentiate them between, if they want to disguise themselves well enough, you're not going to be able to tell the difference between them and another human being. Sometimes they do and appear in such a way in certain clothing where they are clearly not quite right. They either shine brighter or they're whiter or cleaner. And we know this because we can see examples in the Old and New Testament where when people see them, they're shocked by the appearance, and in perhaps their total real appearance. It must be frightening because everybody has to be told to not fear or don't be afraid. But when they appear more human, then it's obviously a little bit more comforting, I guess. I mean, I would be more comforted by seeing that rather than, maybe a seraphim that's, dragon or lizard-like in appearance, And I think that's also where the myths of these lizard people come from, where people talk about, what about the lizard people or the serpent people? Well, the seraphim were serpent-like in appearance. So it makes sense that if we have, I don't think they're aliens like some people say, these ancient scientists, or I do think shows like Ancient Aliens are useful in that they show a lot of evidence for the fact that what we're being told is, just a crock of Barbra Streisand, right? But their conclusions that they come to are not the conclusions we would come to as Christians. They chalk it up to aliens from other planets and so on and so forth. And maybe they're partially correct in that, angels are not originally a earth creature. They were from the heavenlies. And there are many stories of them descending out of the sky, so it would make sense that you would think that. But I think
well, where did they go during the flood is a question, because they certainly appear, they certainly were here before the flood, and certainly they were here again after the flood. So where did they go during the flood?
Well, I think, okay, so before the restrainer of lawlessness was put into place, because I think that restrains their ability to come here and back again to a great degree. And I also think there was a limitation put on their physical life when they come into this world of 120 years, just like with us. And so they just change bodies or can make another one. But I think during the flood time, they either went into the heavens or they descended under the earth or went into a realm where they could survive it that's not in the physical world, because they're capable of doing that. Their offspring, the Nephilim, were not. So the vast majority of them that were above ground drowned. I think many of them may have escaped underground. The Book of Giants talks about a pair of twin brother giants that were forewarned, I think 100 or 200 years before the flood ever happened. I'll have to look that up to make sure that's correct. But there was a couple of twin brothers with names I can't even pronounce. They look almost Hawaiian or something, Mawa or something or other. But the twin brothers were given these visions. I want to say it was the 8 floating stones rising above the water while everything else drowned, and some other things. So they were probably forewarned by their rebellious angel parents that something was coming, and maybe they even prepared. Maybe that's part of what these megalithic structures are, the attempt to survive a flood, and maybe what we're even discovering today in this world with some of these underground things that they keep discovering under the pyramids might have been some way of descending into the earth to protect themselves from the floodwaters and allow them to survive. Because a lot of people will say, well, what about the second incursion? How did that happen? Well, a lot of people will say, well, it happened this way or that way. I don't know why it has to be any one way. I mean, we have Hebrew legends that talk about Og, like literally floating on the ark, like hanging onto the ark, and Noah making a deal with him, right? Now, I don't know if there's any credence to that story, but that's one possibility. And then there's another possibility of, I think it's Noah's second wife. The first one died, but the second one that he took was from, allegedly, according to Hebrew legends, might have had some background in her, whatever. I don't necessarily subscribe to that one because I think the Lord was trying to reset humanity. But there are some who say the reason he allowed this was for prophecy to be fulfilled with the warfare going on all the way until he comes and sets things right. So I think what he was doing, possibly according to these people who believe in that theory, is leveling the playing field, because we were really no match for these massive giants before the flood, the Titan-like giants that I don't think existed after the flood. For some reason, I don't think, it seems like in both Gary Wayne's writings, Derek Gilbert, and Tilman Alberino, all three have mentioned, and even Heiser, I think, that there was some sort of inability for the giants to have offspring after the flood, and the ones they did and survived didn't grow to be as big as their pre-flood predecessors. Like maybe they grew to be 10 to 20 feet tall instead of some of these monsters that were pre-flood, and I don't know how big they were before the flood. So if anybody asks me, I don't really know, because nobody really knows what some of those measurements are. Could they be 100 feet tall? Sure. I mean, we have legends of giants that are that big, but I don't think they were very numerous. But we do know this: however big they were, they ate everything and consumed everything until the point where they began eating us and then eating one another and then having a civil war amongst themselves. Very similar to what you find in Greek legends about their huge wars, where, remember, there was some sort of, I can't remember the name of it, but I did early on in my podcast, I was doing some of the weirder creatures, and one of them was this Titan that had like 50 heads and 100 arms, 50 on each side, and they were guardians later for Zeus and Saturn, Kronos, to protect the underworld and so on. But they apparently were part of this huge war that, and I can't remember the name of it either, but it's like once I do a show, it's out of my head to some degree, unless I revisit my notes. But the Greek war, where the Titans fought against the gods and so on and so forth. So I don't think that's ever stopped either. I think the little g gods that are rebelling against God also fight with one another. Like, the story of the Atlanteans fighting against the Athenians. And I'm pretty sure the Athenians kicked their butt, And so I look at all of this, and I think there was a time in the world where gods literally, and demigods like Hercules and some others, literally walked amongst us as humans. It's why you see the pictographs every place. It's why you see massive architecture every place, giant creatures drawn every place. Every single culture on the face of the earth has stories that are similar to this with different names. I mean, that doesn't just happen. It's clear that some part of our history was very odd. And I think it's, in this day and age, is beginning to get odd again. And we were warned that it would, right, in Matthew 24. So
it is beginning to get odd again. And I think that's probably one of the things that, I've been thinking about this. In fact, I was just talking to my wife about it just the other day, is the whole issue of, we know, we've heard stories, reports of experimental beings that even the U.S. military has created. And, there's not a lot of knowledge about these things, but it seems to me that people really need to know a little bit about that, so that when these things show up, they're not going to be totally freaked out.
Well, I think they are going to be, regardless, because that was one of the warnings too, right? Men's hearts will fail them for what's coming upon the earth, both whatever they see coming out of the heavens. And I can't remember who I heard. Sorry that my memory is so terrible today, but somebody recently did a podcast where they were talking about the verse, that particular verse, where it's talking about signs in the heavens. And it literally, they were saying that it literally gives the impression that what people will be experiencing is monsters coming from the heavens. Do you remember a podcast like that recently?
I'm trying to think. No, not that I can think of monsters coming from the heavens. I mean, it's not hard for me to believe that, but I don't remember a podcast. Unless I don't think it's Alberino. I listened to maybe not the most recent stuff that he's done. I've had Timothy on here before, and I haven't heard him talk about that. I wonder who it was.
It would have. In the last month or so, I've primarily been listening to Blurry Creatures, Prometheus Lens, and there's a couple of others, but they wouldn't have touched on that subject. I know that, like, I like listening to the Days of Noah podcast. That's a good one. And I like JT's mixtape, even though I disagreed with him on the SLS. I think overall he has a pretty good channel.
Just clarify, you used the term a few times, SLS. Just clarify for our listeners what that means. Would you, Robert?
Which term?
SLS?
Oh, yes. SLS is just an easier way of saying Satan's little season, which is a belief that everything pretty much happens. It's kind of a preterist belief system where everything in Revelation, in the Old Testament prophecies, all took place at the destruction of the temple in AD 70, and that Christ's second coming was roughly around that time. I think most of them will say AD 76, Christ returned with all the glorified saints, and we have missing time and evidence of cataclysm and many things like that. And they would argue that some of the architecture that we see, like these massive cathedrals and star forts and cities that seem to have been there, like the whole Tartarian thing, that San Francisco was discovered. It wasn't built. It was just found that way. And all these interesting, like the Chicago thing and the World Fair. And there's so much in this, like orphan trains that are a part of this SLS thing.
Yeah, we're very caught. I'm very familiar with the preterist viewpoint, and I believe that these are things that I remember. There's a British preacher by the name of, I think he's with the Lord now, but his name is David Pawson. I don't know if you've ever heard him speak, but David
Did you say Paulson?
Pawson, Pawson, a wonderful Bible teacher, actually, a wonderful Bible teacher. He was not a preterist, but I remember being at a ministers' conference in the United Kingdom on one occasion, and these guys who were another movement, but they were of the same viewpoint. They took the view that all of the prophecies about Jesus Christ have already been fulfilled. And I remember David Pawson just very pointedly asking them, well, what about the prophecies of Antichrist? Did he fulfill those too? I mean, it was just a classic riposte to an argument that really is it doesn't stand up. But he made the point. But so those are definitely things that to watch out for people. Of course, the other one that concerns me greatly is the whole idea that we're out of here before any of this happens, and I'm not convinced that's true either. So this is an interesting situation we find ourselves in. We just have to keep our eyes on the Lord, right?
Well, it feels like sometimes my channel is having to become a redress and rebuttal of Satan's little season. Because they're very good about defending their position. What word am I looking for here? I get more comments from Satan Little Season people than virtually anybody else. The two people I get a lot of comments from are those wanting to talk about Tartaria and those defending Satan's Little Season, because I don't agree with it. I mean, the very first thing that comes to mind for me is I don't see any evidence of every living thing in the sea having died. Even if we gave a short time for things to regrow, I just don't see this much sea life reforming in the ocean in that little time if every living thing in the sea died, as Revelation talks about. And I also think that this idea that they come up with, that either New Jerusalem is floating above us in the sky and we can't see it, it's hidden, or it's at the North Pole, and that's where the camp of the saints is a stretch. And I think it's not biblical, because everything to do with where the king that sits on the throne of David is all out of Jerusalem. And Revelation describes an earthquake that pretty much flattens the city and splits Mount Olive in half, creating this wide valley where the Israelis that have received Jesus, as their Messiah at this point, go hiding in that valley. And I've heard a couple of Satan's Little Season folks talk about, well, there was this earthquake and the Mount of Olives did split, but they filled it in to hide it. It's like, you're not reading the verse in Zechariah 14 then, because this is a wide valley capable of fitting a good portion of the nation of Israel in it, not a crack that you can fill in with cement or dirt or whatever. Plus, again, every living thing in the sea dying. But there's lots of other things. Like, to me, the prophecy in 2 Peter doesn't make sense, where people are beginning to grow weary and scoffing about the return of the Lord Jesus, right? They're like, well, where is Jesus? Where is he coming? Blah, blah, blah. Because everything goes on, just like when the Father's passed away and nothing ever changes, he's not coming back. And I really kind of see Satan's Little Season as a Christian version of that, right? They're not atheistic mockers, but this whole thing seems born out of a combination of, where is Jesus, right? And then seeing things that I think are related just to the little g God's rebellion and the seed war going on, not that Christ reigned for 1,000 years. I don't see anywhere in history, even if they added time or took away time or whatever, where we had 1,000 years on this earth after AD 70 that is primarily characterized by peace. All we've ever known is the rise of Islam, warfare, feudalism. Again, like you just said, I don't see it either.
Yeah, it's not there. I don't see it either. And the other thing I think that it really does do, and that these are my concerns, is that people are by various means are dumbed down to the point that they're not looking for the things that they need to be looking for. I mean, it seems to me that the last days are characterized by a global persecution against the unsaved Jewish remnant. I think the church is clearly persecuted as well. But for me, I see, I traveled, as I mentioned to you before we got on the air, but I've talked about this many times on my show. I traveled with this Jewish man called Arthur Katz, and he had an understanding. He was one of, there's some people you meet that they kind of live out of time. He lived in a different time. He lived in the time of the end time persecution of the Jewish people. Wherever we went, he saw because we would often travel in Europe and we go to the death camps in Poland, but we went to other places in Europe and studying what happened to the Jewish people under the Nazi time as a understanding of how it might be for Jewish people in the times to come. And that totally makes sense, because they are God's people who he wants to redeem, but that is yet to happen. And so we see this period of time when it tells us in the book of Revelation, that he goes after them, the seed of the woman and everything. And so we see all of that going on. And so I kind of see that in a end time picture. And I start to, now I sort of see this rising tide of anti-Semitism coming around the world. And I think, boy, the scene is being set for it in a way that you wouldn't have 20 years ago. You would have found hard to believe that could be the case. And so right. I see there's sort of that tide rising. But if you're of the view that, well, this is all happened, it's not going to happen, you're kind of you're not forewarned and forearmed.
I totally agree, and I have as much said so, like, in 4 separate videos, some of them 45 minutes long, some of them almost 2 hours long, going over specific detail and, the reinstitution of sacrifice as a memoriam. It's got to take place in a new temple, and it's got to take place at the throne of David site in Jerusalem, not the North Pole, not at Santa's workshop, and not in some floating city. There's so much, okay, to be positive about it, to put a good positive on it, because I feel like I'm tearing, these people up and their fellow brothers in Christ, and I don't want to do that. But I would say they're very good researchers when it comes to pointing out that history is not what they're telling us. These, cities that we find incredible architecture in, cataclysms, things that seem like we're uncovering activity of the little g gods that they're trying to hide, not because they're trying to hide the millennial reign of Christ, but because they're trying to hide their activity. They don't want to be discovered. It's easier for them to be deceitful when they are in the shadows, so they can appear. They don't want people to suddenly discover, oh, these guys are actually not ancient wisdom beings. These beings are not friendly visitors just trying to aid humanity, and they're not seeding us here and helping us grow and all these other things. They're really monstrous, and they wind up destroying everything, and so I believe that's one of the reasons they hide what they're doing, and they hide history from us, and they don't want us to know. And maybe there's the possibility that some of it is that we're just simply being protected by God, right? Isn't that part of what happened at the Tower of Babel? We were well on our way to being capable of anything, right? Isn't that what God warned? Like, if we don't stop these humans and their worship of the little g gods, they will be capable of doing anything. And I don't think that's a wet blanket from God. I think he's protecting us like, you would take a AR-15 out of the hands of a 3-year-old. You're not ready for it. That's a loving father protecting his creation. And that's all he's ever been about, from the pre-flood world where the little g gods wanted to build back better, so to speak, right? They wanted to destroy what God made and build it back in their own image, replace the humans who had the birthright with their own vision of what humans should be and make them no longer human, but after their own image. And just that's been their goal all through this, just reset and replace and build back better whatever God made, and just confront him to his face.
Robert, that's a great place for us to pause and come back. The next time we talk, we'll maybe pick it up there. But Robert, just tell the listeners where they can find your Pilgrims Grey Chronicles, how they can find you.
Well, sure. On YouTube, of course, I upload the podcast to YouTube, and any streaming platform, every major streaming platform, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, all of them cover the show. I upload it usually through Spreaker, but it disseminates it to every major thing. And then if you want to support us by buying merchandise, I'm wearing one of the Pilgrims Grey Chronicle hats right there. You can buy merchandise to support us, and I typically take everything that we earn from the show, whether it's the money we get from views or anything, and I dump it right back into the show to spread the outreach. So I'm not really making any money. So if you buy 10 shirts, I'm just going to use your money to advertise, to spread the show out, to reach more people, because I don't believe we have a whole lot of time left, folks. But in the end, we win. So, and don't have fear. Don't let any of this, because we're not given a spirit of fear either, right? But of great strength, and we conquer in the end. You have nothing to fear. So don't be like those whose hearts will fail them, because you have a God that loves you and lives in you. Think of that. You're a unique generation. No other generation has the Holy Spirit living in them like a temple. Just this one.
Amen. Robert Clark from Pilgrims Grey Chronicles, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey!
Gather round, ye travelers, lend me your ear. A tale of heroes who knew no fear. Through shadowed woods and mountains steep, their legacy lives where the wild winds sweep. Murs carried on the ale-soaked breeze, songs as endless as the trees. Raise your tankards high and sing for the great pilgrims and what they bring to every corner. Their stories stay. Hail the Chronicles of Pilgrims grey.